Welcome. This is the podcast series dedicated to living a revenue culture. And the pandemic reminded us that we have to have profitable revenue. And it's also made it really clear that we have to have people first culture. And what people don't necessarily recognize is those two things go together. You're never going to optimize. When you optimize your culture, you're going to maximize your profits. You're never going to maximize your profits until you optimize your culture. So that's what this is dedicated to. And today our guest is Kathleen Duffy. Kathleen is the CEO of the Duffy Group. They're a global recruitment firm that helps corporations find the right talent. And I'm guessing part of that, and I'll ask Kathleen about it later, is that's also helping the right talent find the right corporation so that they end up with what we would talk about as a right culture. She's also the author of a new book called The Revolutionizing Recruitment, and she has a podcast by the same name. She's a member of Forbes Human Resources Council, a 2020 most influential woman in Arizona. And I could extend the list for about half an hour, but we'll kind of break it there. Now, I do want to talk about two things about Kathleen that won't necessarily show up in her resume. One is she is probably the poster child for leading by example. She always cares about the people around her. She's mission driven. And when people get to know her, they just want to follow her and they want to try and figure out how to lead the way she does. The second thing is, you probably won't know, is she and her husband Frank do some of the best Christmas decorations in their yard that you've ever seen anywhere. A constant award winner. So with that, welcome, Kathleen.
Thanks, Rick. It's great to be here. And just full disclosure, I'm not allowed to help with the Christmas decorations.
That's all Frank?
That's all Frank, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's always beautiful. We bring the grandkids and my kids when they were little. And so it's always a yearly event to come by your house and see what you and your neighbors have accomplished. So Kathleen, I gave a little brief intro into your background, but I having been in business for 30 years, when you started the business, I'm sure you've learned some things that when you wrote the book and you do the podcast, you're now applying today that weren't obvious to you when you started. Tell us a little bit about your journey and a couple of those things that were really ahas that you're now making part of what you do.
Sure. Well, in 30 years, I have several MBAs from the School of Hard Knocks and several PhDs from surviving recessions, economic crises, and now a pandemic. So my journey started after 8 years with a retained executive search firm, and they were relocating the company to the Bay Area. And at that time, relocating Frank and I at that time was not something that was going to be in the cards. So it was an opportunity for me to start my business. Now, honestly, there wasn't a lot of foresight to it. I needed to, pay my mortgage. And I had this one skill. I had this skill as a recruitment researcher, which is the front end of all retained search firms. And so there was a decision to take that skill set and either introduce it to other executive search firms, sell it to other executive search firms, or to sell it to corporate America. And I decided to give it a shot in corporate America. And that it really caught on because in the early 90s, there was two flavors of recruiting, and it was either a contingent or retained. Again, both models are based on a candidate's compensation, or you placed ads in the Sunday paper.
Yep.
That was it. So now I had introduced this new option out there where they could unbundle the search process and only buy the pieces that they need because we work in billable time. So fortunately, it really took off and it grew organically, really over the next 10 years, I would say.
So when you talk about research as the front end, say more about that, because I'm not sure everybody appreciates what that is.
Sure. So the term is actually called recruitment research. And we have a 5-step process that we have developed, here. And it starts with a strategy intake. And that's where we have the conversation with the hiring leaders and other key stakeholders to find out about the position, to find out about the company. Culture, right, is a big piece of it. But the other part of it is strategy. Where are the people who are in the job that you're looking to hire currently employed? Are they in your competitors? Are they in another industry? And then from that strategy, we go to step 2, which is name generation. So we take those companies, if it's the competitors, the industry, and we identify who those people are that are doing the job. And then the next step is to do the outreach to those candidates and tell the client story, and get them engaged, because they are pretty much the most passive of candidates out there. They're not looking at other opportunities. Those that are interested and qualified, then we do a deeper dive interview. And the final step of our process is a report and presentation. So we deliver our candidates to our clients real time. So they start seeing candidates in about 10 to 15 business days. But what really differentiates the recruitment research model from traditional recruiting models is that our candidates that we identify are the property of our client. Whereas traditional firms own their candidates, our clients will own the candidate. So it's really more of a partnership. And in this crazy candidate-driven climate that we're in right now, companies need to start thinking, 90 days from now, what kinds of folks they're going to be needing, what seats are going to need to be filled, and start building those pipelines of talent, because they've got to start building those relationships. And again, it gets back to the culture piece that we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, I find that, and obviously I've known your work for quite a while, but I've got different glasses on now that I've started to recognize the power of the culture of the organization. And, we've told people for years, you get the culture you deserve. And, so now it's how do people, in the case where you work with a client, how do you help the client share their culture so that somebody who's in a job and happy doing the job they're doing goes, wow, that's a place I could really like to be? Is that part of it?
Yeah, and one of the questions that we ask in the intake session is, Rick, why does somebody who is at ABC company want to come and work for you and for the revenue game? What's the story? If you were having a beer with them, what would you be telling them? And that's what we're going to pull out of them. And, we don't want to hear things like, well, we have, paid medical benefits. I mean, those are all a piece of it, but they want to hear how you engage with your employees, how, what they're doing in the community, what companies are doing in the community. They want to understand the leader style, because while you're going to have a company culture, there's also going to be a leader and a department culture, and they have to be able to resonate with that. And again, it reflects back on the company's values, core values, and how they're really living those out.
And today, I hadn't even thought of this question before, but as you're talking, it strikes me that how organizations manage change must be a really important piece for potential employees, because one of the things we've learned, as you told your story of your PhDs, every one of those PhDs is a major change. And so is change part of it when you're thinking about the culture of the employer?
Yeah, and I think that for some, a lot of that has to do with an environment that can be flexible and agile. And as a small business owner, I can be Gumby. But, you look at large corporations, Intel or any of and it's not as easy for them to be as agile, so they have to be much more creative about it. I also think that with social media today, candidates are able to actually see what companies are doing and their commitment to being flexible. But we've got Glassdoor, whether it's good or bad, but it is a resource. Also to look at, I tell a lot of executives to look at the corporate board and to see what the makeup is. I'm real involved with the Women on Boards initiative, and about gender and gender equality and diversity on corporate boards. And that also says a lot about the company and their commitment.
Do you find some employers, when you start to ask them questions like that, they almost glaze over? They didn't realize that stuff was important?
Some companies, I would say it's a lot better than it used to be.
Good.
People are talking about it more. CEOs are being forced to make these decisions, and it's and they're so again, we have buying power.
Yeah.
So I can, as a woman-owned business, and I am looking at investment funds for my 401k.
Yeah.
I have the buying power to be working with money managers that are women or are working with like-minded businesses. And if, people don't start to think about those folks who are purchasing or making those purchasing decisions, they're gonna, they're not gonna make it.
Yeah, they're gonna miss out. Now, as you were telling how you do this, one of the things that kind of jumps up is, and maybe you can't define this by research, but I would think when somebody comes into an organization, the way you recruit them, they would be more likely to be there for an extended period of time. Is there any research that says that's true?
I don't know if there is scientific research, to be honest with you. We do our own research to see how long candidates stay in their roles. And I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I think the last one was it was close to 85 or 86%. And what's nice about it is that the recruitment research model is, if for some reason the candidate, things just don't work out, life changes, right? We know that. And whereas with a traditional recruiting firm, they would go back and restart the search, because I talked about this report that they have, the candidate report. We just go back to that and we continue to build off of that, as opposed to restarting an entire project again. And that's why then, I'm just thinking of one project that we did, and something changed in the person's personal life. I think it was their parents got very ill and they had to go take that. And so we were able to refill that position, I don't know, within a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and one of the things going forward with the amount of change that's happening in the world, do you find that when you get the right people at the right organization for the right reasons, and by right reasons, I mean more than just the 401k or the money, that there's more flexibility, that they move around in the organization as the organization moves? Or do they tend to just disconnect or get disconnected?
So do they have upward mobility within the company? Is that it? Or do they just get there and
Well, it could be upward mobility, but as the market, as you described how the market has changed since you've been in the business, you move roles or functions or responsibilities around to match what the market wants. And so the person you hired 1 year to do a particular job, maybe that job is less necessary today and they need to move into another role. does the way you do the research help them be committed to the company mission so that they're willing to adapt as the market requires it, or is that not researched yet?
Yeah, that's not really on the research side. That's really gets to be on the storytelling side, so that we are able to really tell that story, and that's what gets the candidates excited about the opportunity.
Now, because we see on the revenue piece that what people were doing 2 years ago, maybe today you're doing less of it or none of it, and you got good people who believe in what we're doing, but their role, they morph into different parts of the organization because they can learn and they embrace the mission.
Right. And I was listening to one of your previous podcasts, and you had a woman on there. I think her name was Susan Foley. Is that right?
Yes.
And she talked about entrepreneurs.
Yep.
And I think that companies that embrace that philosophy it allows these candidates or these employees to be able to move around and to stay engaged, because they're constantly being challenged with their brain.
Yeah. And obviously one of the things today is, every time I speak, I ask all the CEOs, how many of you are worried about losing key people, and everybody raises their hand. And then how many of you need to find people to hit your goals and you're not sure if you can, and everybody raises their hand. So have you got lessons or examples or ways people should approach their businesses to, you're not going to solve those by one fell swoop, but to mitigate or to take advantage as best you can today?
Sure. So what I recommend is people visit with their key employees or high potential employees, whatever you want to call them, at least quarterly, and ask them, are you motivated? What motivates you to keep, coming into work every day? What resources do you need to do your job better? What are you looking to do next? And then continue to anchor and build off of those conversations, because I spent many years trying to make people happy in my company, and instead of saying to them, Rick, are you motivated? Are you, are you interested in another type of a role? What are you thinking about? I tried to answer what those questions were in my head as the world according to Kathleen, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
It didn't work. I spent, sleepless nights worrying about them. Can I make them happy? Could I do this? Could I do that? And when I finally realized, just ask them. I'm sleeping much better now.
One of the things that we've observed, and it really starts with, you probably read or heard the Simon Sinek Infinite Game book. Maybe not. Simon's got a book out that talks about the difference between companies who are infinite companies. They're making plans for 100 years or for multi-generations, versus finite companies who live by Wall Street monthly, weekly, quarterly kinds of numbers. And from our work in revenue strategy, what that really comes down to is your company either has a big purpose, and when we say big purpose, it means a purpose bigger than just making money. Or if it can be just making money, it's an absolute legitimate reason. As you said, when you started the business, got to pay the mortgage. So,
Right.
We often, start a business, or part of the reason we started is I got to feed my kids. But if that's the sole purpose, and that's a legitimate sole purpose, it's really a mercenary business. You're here to make money. And so every one of your employees learns from you. And if the only purpose of being here is make money, as soon as somebody offers them more, they're going to leave, because that's what the owner taught them. And so we look at this world and start to identify, is the organization a mercenary organization? And, everybody else doesn't know, but we live in Phoenix. And when we went through the 2007-8 housing bubble explosion, and half the contractors in the area went out of business because they were mercenaries. They were in the contracting business because you could build a lot of houses fast and flip them. They weren't long-term builders. That was just something to do to make a bunch of money.
Mhm.
And so as employees, my belief is employees are acutely aware. And as you talked earlier about transparency, the employees are acutely aware, are they coming here for a job just to make a bunch of money for a while, or are they coming here because they really care about the work? Is that different today than it was 2 or 3 years ago, do you think? Did the pandemic have an impact on that?
Yeah, and once again, I think that companies have gotten smarter over the years, but definitely I think just the whole work environment in terms of being able to work from home. I mean, I have led and managed a virtual company for 30 years. So we do not have a brick and mortar. Well, we have a small brick and mortar where where I come out of and some of our operations. But for the most part, all my employees have worked from home for 30 years, and it's worked just fine. And people would always say, how do you, what are they doing? Do you trust them? And I'm like, yeah. And of course, I operate from a place of trust. So I start with trust until you take it away from me. So that's kind of part of our culture here is trust. And when you also are working in billable time, your clients have to trust you that you are, charging them the right amount of money, and you're not saying, well, I worked 8 hours today and I'm going to bill you for 12. They have to trust you. And that's another critical component as well.
That's interesting. Certainly, your work requires you to triage the talent that you find for the corporations. Do you triage the corporations to determine if they're the right client for Duffy Group?
Oh, absolutely. So for example, if the hiring leader will not commit to at least an hour on the phone with us to do that intake, and they're just saying, you just talk to my in-house HR folks and they'll tell you everything about it, we will not take the search on. If the position it is, so for example, in the healthcare space, there are not enough nurses, right? There are not enough physical therapists, OT, you just name it.
Yep.
And on an hourly bill rate, it could become an enormous bill with very little to show for it. And so we have gotten really good about knowing what is good business for us and for them if we're the right fit. Sometimes they'll come in. We had somebody wanting us to do some recruiting for unskilled labor. Again, that is not a good space for us either.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and it sounds like you've, over the years, really honed the Duffy Group culture. And so that as you talk about knowing good business from bad and knowing, the deals that you want to take on because there's going to be value transferred to your client and to the talent and to Duffy, so that you're thinking about it as a whole culture, not just can you make money.
Right. Well, and again, when you start talking about, every company is in business to make money, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's our thing. But when you even look at our fee structure, so if I'm working on a search for, a head of marketing, and it's $150,000 base salary, for us that could take between 100 and 120 hours to complete that project. And so you're looking at $15,000 to $17,000 versus a company that works on a percentage of the candidate's salary. So you look at a 20% fee, that's
Yep.
$30,000. And it only goes up from there. So, people always say, why do you work in a billable time frame? You could make so much more money doing it the other way. And and they're always shocked because it's not about the money. It's about being that partner. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for a marriage. We just don't want to date our clients. We want to be a value-added partner to them because they know they can just turn us on and turn us off. And that's what's really worked.
Well, that sounds like the perfect definition of the infinite business model.
I think the other thing too, Rick, that we talked about how the company got started, and Frank and I were not able to relocate to the Bay Area, and the reason we weren't is that we were trying desperately to start a family.
Yeah.
And so we adopted our son the year after I started the company. And it took us a long time to become parents. And I didn't want to miss out on anything. And that was one of the reasons why, I worked from home. Nobody was working from home back in the Stone Ages. But then, so Daniel came and I was able to still work. I had somebody come in and take care of him while I was working. But I never missed his first steps, the babysitter would call me and pull me in. But what happened is that I would meet clients that were like me, and they loved to recruit, but they had small children too, and they wanted to be at the bus stop, and they wanted to be able to feed them a real breakfast and not just throw Pop-Tarts at them while they were driving them to daycare. And that is really how the foundation of our work-life balance and grew. Our culture has always been about that. And my workforce is predominantly women because we are the primary caregivers in our families, but it has changed. We've gotten more diverse. We do have some men in our organizations too, because now a lot of that caregiving is shared, right? But there's that piece of it. And then we also now have gotten to the point where we have aging parents. And sometimes we need to be able to have that flexible work schedule so that we can care for our parents and make sure that they get to the doctors on time, or whatever the case may be. But that's been a really core foundation of our culture here, and I will kick and scream before I let go of that.
As I'm listening, and we try to help people realize that a business culture isn't just the investors and the leaders, and it's not even just the investors and the leaders and the employees, but it's also your business partners, and it's also your ideal customer, and it's also your community. And I know you're really big on giving back to the community, and that's appreciated by everybody, but so many people miss that. And they miss the fact that when you are purpose-driven and you actually live it, now I'm guessing you have a loyalty. Well, first off, when you're recruiting somebody who already has a job, already making money, already paying their bills, already okay with what's going on Monday through Friday, if they don't trust you, if they don't see your empathy, or they don't see something in this other than you're trying to sell them, I'm guessing that would be a really, really hard recruitment. And likewise, I'm guessing some of the people who are your clients, to use your transparency term, they recognize that for you, it's not just the hourly billing, but it's the right talent in the right place in the right amount of time. And so I love the way you're living what we would call a revenue culture, and that everybody's winning.
Right. And I think, that I'll jokingly tell clients that we're agnostic. We can be candidate agnostic. So if you have an internal candidate that is being considered for this chief marketing officer role, we don't care whether it's the internal candidate that gets hired or the external candidate. We vet them out equally because we are not motivated by who's going to get us the highest fee. Yeah. And people really do appreciate that. And I think most of all, the internal candidate really appreciates it.
Yeah, interesting. And it's surprising how seldom, when I talk to CEOs, when they think of culture, they really think of their leadership team and their employees, but it's really bigger than that. And, particularly if you're really going to live it, it's bigger than that. Mm-hmm. So tell, as you look at where we are now, I mean, technology's changed. People are working from home. There's still pandemic, whatever it is, overlay or contingency. I have no idea. But what changes do you think people who are first running companies should be thinking about? How do I manage my company in a way that I'm a place where the right people want to be? And then the second question I'm going to ask you is for the talent, because I often think talent doesn't know how to interview for anything other than job description and money. So what should those two groups be thinking about or doing, or what's different than it was 10 years ago?
Well, I guess I always laugh when a human resources leader is, starting a new position, and they say, "Yeah, the CEO brought me in to change the culture," and the CEO is the culture.
Yeah.
I learned that just in my own company, because I fought with the image of what the perfect CEO is, and I didn't fit that image. And when somebody told me, take a step back and look at yourself, and I know exactly what I have to do to be the CEO and to run my company and to lead my company. I just do it in a nicer and gentler way. And so that's the culture in my company. We are a very nice company. And so I think that's where it does all start at the top. And again, it is reflected in your company values. And I think from how do we blend the talent piece and the culture piece? We have to have questions, behavioral-based questions that come into that ask about and uncover the individual and what are they going to be able to live our values. So trust and integrity are huge in my organization. And so we have to really make sure that we ask those questions. And, again, like I said, we trust you until the moment that you cause us to not trust you anymore.
Yeah. And for the employee, that particularly for maybe the younger employee in their 20s, early 30s, do you have any advice for them as to how to look at opportunities so they end up someplace where they're happy, where they're glad they get up in the morning, and whether they are working at their home office or whether they're driving to the office, that they're glad they're doing it?
Well, it's funny. We have just started hiring young people. And before I would have never hired a new college grad, much less somebody who had less than 10 years of work experience. They didn't necessarily have to be a recruiter, but what we're finding is they bring a different perspective. They bring, the innovation and the ideas that these young people are bringing to my organization. And it may be that I've just been doing it for so long that I'm blinded by some of this, but they have opened my eyes to a variety of different things. We are also trying to help them understand what it is to have a career as a recruiter, that this can be a very lucrative career. It can, especially depending on what your personal goals are in life. If you're looking to, like me, to have a family and want to be able to have that sort of a balance, you can do that. If you always wanted to have your own business, again, talking about entrepreneurship, you can start your own business. So we're starting to have those conversations with these young people earlier, and encouraging them to think about this as a career, and providing them with the tools that they need to to be able to succeed as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that I think, and you were talking about what they've helped teach you. And that's a hard one for so many of the CEOs or senior leadership to accept the fact that people 3 or 4 levels down in the organization may have the ideas, the observations, the relationships with the customer, or the creativity that's what you're dying for, but somehow you think it needs to come from the top of the organization. And when every CEO tells me they want to scale and they want to be sustainable, yet after you're about 3 people, you can no longer be the one responsible for either of those 2 things. Everybody else is going to do it. So how do we get everybody, rolling in the same direction kind of scenario? So that's the interesting challenge.
Yeah. And it's just like any kind of relationship. It's about communication, right?
Yeah.
Upward and downward. And we just, it's hard. I mean, we have almost, 40 employees, and I don't get to interface with the recruiters as much as I used to because of the size. And it is hard for me.
Yeah. That particular issue is the one that we keep, I guess, digging, looking to understand. It seems that the more the organization is purpose driven, the easier it is to manage a large organization. Because if everybody believes they're going the same place, and we think of places like Disney or Southwest Airlines, where they're very much purpose driven organizations, and not everybody does perfect stuff, but at least their intent is correct and they're going in the right direction. Right. So I hope all organizations, and I've been involved in tech Vistage for decades. And, one of the things I've learned through all those companies is they all started with some purpose. And sometimes we get caught up in payroll and, mortgages, and we forget our purpose. But I hope everybody starts to bring that back, because I think it's more fun to work in a purpose-driven company.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
Last question for you. As we think about whatever stage of the pandemic we're in or out of, what are the lessons that both employers and employees should take away from hopefully what will be a post-pandemic business environment from a recruitment and employment standpoint?
I guess I just hope that we see more empathy. The pandemic unleashed so many different things, good and bad. But I think what really got elevated was the employees' mental health. And I know that I had to have a number of conversations with employees and saying, Rick, you're taking tomorrow off. Okay, you know what? Rick, just shut it down right now. You got to take the rest of the afternoon off. You just need a break. And we had to really get people to to just do that. So I hope that there's more empathy. I think that, I'm just grateful I don't have kids that are school age, because I probably would have killed them, during the pandemic. Like, why aren't you doing your homework? And so I know that there was that on top of it. And then people that did get sick, and just the fear of getting the virus, and listening to the hundreds of thousands of people that died as a result of it. So I just hope that we become a more empathetic society and companies, and really care about our people.
I guess I love that, and it makes me ask another question. And I'm a huge empathy fan, and at one time in my life, I actually taught social work, and empathy was one of the things that I used to teach. But where do people learn how to be empathetic? I mean, if you're 30 years old and nobody has taught you about empathy, well, how do we address that today?
Oh gosh, you know what? I don't know. Maybe sometimes you just either have it or you don't have it, right? I think that there are some people that it's just part of their DNA, and there are others, and maybe it's just really about being self-aware. We've been doing a lot of work with the Enneagram in our company to understand our different types and our subtypes. And so while, I'm a 2, I'm a considerate helper. So I probably OD on empathy.
Yeah.
And I may have somebody else in my team that ODs on the action side of things. I'm low action, high feeling. They might be high action, low feeling. We have to partner together so that I can show that individual how to be more empathetic, maybe some language that they can use. But at the flip side, they can also help me to be more action oriented too, and not let people, roll all over me, which I'm very good at.
Well, yeah, but I've noticed you do always have a line in the sand you don't go past.
Yeah.
You have things that are important to you that you don't compromise. So.
Right. Yeah. There are some deal breakers, and yeah. And being kind is not one of them.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's one of the things that at least a lot of people got from the pandemic, was the recognition that we are in this thing together. And there were a few people that didn't get that, but a lot of people did. And all of a sudden, they're willing to be a little more vulnerable, and to give a little bit more, just because there aren't many other choices,
Yeah.
So.
And it was hard, because you didn't, nobody gave us a playbook for this. And yeah, and it was scary. I mean, I was scared, but I couldn't, I didn't want people to feel that. So I would just wait till Saturday, and my poor family had to deal with it.
Oh, well, Kathleen, I want to thank you very much for joining this today. And this has been extremely valuable, and because you sit on both sides of, this culture thing, for leadership and the employees, and you have an infinite approach to the business world. So thank you very much for joining us today. And, maybe we'll get you back sometime in the future. Now I know you have one. I'm going to start listening to yours.
Great. Well, I've appreciated, our friendship over, gosh, what's it been? Almost 20 years now, right, Rick?
Yep. Long time. So yeah, it's been great. Well, thank you. I thank everybody for joining us today. And we will be back in a couple of weeks for the next one.